Hello, and welcome back to the White Noise podcast with your usual hosts, me, Sky, and Leanna. Today, I've been a really terrible student because I have come to class with no notes, but we are talking about fandoms, so I feel like I'm going to have a lot to say, but I'm going to throw things over to Leanna straight away to get started because she's the one that came prepared for this.
So basically, we've decided to kind of focus this episode around, like Sky said, the concept of fandom, but we thought that's such a huge concept, it's like a monolith, it's massive, like where do you even start? So I came up with this rough idea, and we're going to explore fandom through 4 main pillars, so bear with. These are what I have classified them as. They are immersion, original content, which would be stuff like fanfic, merch, and social media. So I think this is going to be a bit of a history lesson, we've decided.
I'm
And
excited.
yeah, I mean, like fanfic, we can't really say when it started, or like, well, fanfic, I'm going to start with because I mean, it's something that people have been doing for classic literature. I mean, a lot of novels could be called fanfic of other
Mhm.
past works.
It's something
Um,
we talk about a lot anyway,
Exactly.
so
Romeo and Juliet, people may not realize, was based on a work beforehand. The Three Musketeers was based on a French novel.
nobody has
I
ever
don't
had an original idea in history.
exactly. People say there isn't an original idea since Shakespeare. Even Shakespeare was stealing shit. And there's this concept called pastiche, which is kind of like almost considered like the fancy version of fanfic, if I'm gonna like really simplify and generalize it. But at the end of the day, pastiche, which is what people would say Shakespeare was doing, it's fanfic. Let's just accept
Just
it.
call it what it is, all right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I find fascinating is that this is a practice which we now we just consider it part of fandom. Like, no one looks at, say, like fanfic anymore as just like, oh, I kind of liked this thing, so I've decided to write something about it. Now, if someone was to write fanfic, you would just assume they're obsessed and they were part
Mhm.
of that piece of media's fandom. I don't know, I've never seen someone write fanfic and not just assume that, you know?
I think also something that's really changed it, and this might be skipping ahead ever so slightly,
Mm,
but that's just the way this podcast works, is the fact that once upon a time, like you said, people who wrote fanfic generally were so obsessed with
mhm.
whatever fandom that they were in. And, there is no shame here because me and Leanna have been and are still are multiple fandoms.
Mhm.
This month in particular, you'll see from certain episodes. Um, so yeah, you'd have like this deep rooted obsession that you needed to get out
Mm,
somehow. And again, most people in fandoms tend to be really creative in some way.
mhm.
But the point I'm trying to get to here is that I think one of the biggest things that's changed about fan fiction is the fact that today we now have films coming out based
Yeah.
on fan fictions. We have fan fictions that are being turned into actual novels, not even changed anymore. They're just
Yeah.
being bound and sold in bookstores. And in a way, it's great. It's so great because how many times have like we said on this podcast, people just say in general that fan fiction writers are generally some of the most creative, both good and bad,
Mhm.
writers out there. But then in the same way, now that it's become yet another thing that people want to monetize, it's created an even bigger stigma in a
Yeah,
way.
I would
You know what I mean?
agree. I think it was already this thing people viewed as weird, but now that it's become this thing where you can just press Control F and replace a
Yeah.
name and then get your book
Yeah.
published, it's become much weirder. But
Mm,
so basically I went straight to fanfic as a way to kind of like frame what we're considering fandom, you know? What I want to do is take a step back and talk about the first pillar I mentioned, which is immersion. I would consider immersion just, well, it's in the title, just completely immersing yourself in that piece of media. So I would think of this as like learning all the lore, studying it, rewatching it. I feel like that's a key part is the rewatching, I would
mhm.
say.
Yeah.
If there's like languages or something within the media, some people get really into that, cosplaying, those kind of things. And the first thing I'd say that like people got like super deeply into on like a global scale was Star Trek. I mean, people got into things on a massive scale, obviously, before the 1960s. Star Trek originally came out in the 1960s, but I would say that's the thing where people would go, oh, that was crazy. You know, that, the Beatles, those kind of things. It all
Mhm.
happened in like the mid-century. And Star Trek's funny because although it launched in 66, it didn't get bigger till later on. And that's something which I would say is still true to this day about a lot of stuff that build a fandom. They
Mhm.
come later on. I mean,
Mhm.
that's changed a little with the internet, but I would still say things take time. You don't overnight build fandom. Yeah, you can
Mhm.
overnight build a fan base, but fandom takes time.
That's such a good point. Like,
Mm,
yeah, having that difference between a fan base and a fandom, because
mm,
like you have all those people that some people are joking when they say it, but then you have other people that are really serious and they're like, I liked so and so before
mhm,
they were like big. And it's like, look, I get it.
yeah,
I used to like when people used to say stuff like that, I used to cringe because I would be like, oh my God, it's like you don't own that media. But then I
yeah,
actually realized it's not always because people are feeling possessive over it.
mhm,
It's like, you know, when you get like really, really into something, and like me and
yeah,
Leanna have said before that, like, obviously you don't have to have ADHD to be in a fandom, but because we do both have ADHD, like when we used to get obsessed with stuff when we were younger and we still do now,
mhm,
it really does take over. My point is that when you get really into something and then, you know, you tell everybody about it, right? Because you want everybody to share in it. And then as soon as they do, you're like, no, wait, that was mine.
It's funny because I think when something gets really big, it's this weird like contradiction because one hand it becomes a little bit easier to immerse yourself in it completely because you're surrounded by it, but it also becomes harder because there's more people commenting on it and taking you out of the magic of it. Does that make any
Mhm.
sense? So
Mhm.
it's weird, some texts work really well with a really big fandom and some don't. It's hard to explain, but
And then I think as well, because like you said, jumping from fan base to fandom, like
mm,
with a fan base, it's very close knit. You build that community, you get to know people in that community, you feel proud to be in that community. And then when it jumps into fandom, that's when a lot of the negativity comes into it. And then you kind of do feel a little bit embarrassed to be like to love some things because it's like, oh,
mhm.
I don't love that part of it. Like I'm not involved in that part. But unfortunately, that is the part people always associate you with.
I agree. And it's funny because originally you'd think of fandom not as a scale thing, you'd think of it as an intensity thing. So, like, you'd think of fandom as like an intense love. But I feel like it doesn't really mean that anymore. It means more like how widely something is loved. And I'd say that's like the Marvelification and the Disneyification of a lot of media. But
Mhm.
that's just me throwing thoughts out. Yeah, so say like with Star Trek, as I was saying, that like blew up like crazy. I think it took until like the 70s to get really big. And then obviously they brought it back with the revivals. Oh, new lore, oh, new stuff, and you can just super dive into it. And basically, I'm going to dive into the next pillars before I give a brief, quick anecdote. So I personally, I think lore is my favorite thing about anything. You know, it just
Mhm.
is. Like, I don't care necessarily about ships very often. That's not really my thing. Edits, I don't really care about much of that. But lore, I'm there, mama. And
Mhm.
recently, me and my boyfriend have been watching all the Alien films, and he is living. And I keep forgetting there is actually lore to the Alien films. So, like,
Mhm.
you know, the life cycle of an alien and the companies and like Wayland Yutani Corp. And he was like, "What's Prometheus? Covenant? Is that a sequel to Prometheus?" And he's just mind blown, and he's loving life. And then he's like,
Mhm.
"But does Alien vs Predator have anything to do with this?" And I was like, oh my god, things you forget even have lore, have lore.
Mhm.
So we've been doing our little wiki dives, and it's been a very lovely bonding experience,
I
I
love
will
that for
say.
you so much. Like, I love that invigorating feeling. Like, in it, does this count? Yeah, I'm gonna make it count. So I recently have deep dived into Greek mythology.
I've seen on your stories.
Some people might have done. It's all started because of this concept album that came out. Some people have probably heard of it. It's getting quite big on TikTok. Epic the musical. It's a musical version of the Odyssey.
Mhm.
So I listened to it, fell in love with the music, absolutely feral, eager, waiting for the rest of them to come out. So in that time, I've just deep delved into Greek mythology. And I thought it was going to be like another one of my fixations. It would burn out pretty quick. And don't get me wrong, it's only been a few weeks. But I realized in kind of, I guess, maybe a similar way, that I have deep dived into Greek mythology, but I found the women of Greek mythology, and
Mm,
that is the bit I think is going to keep me there. Like
yeah.
Obviously, Greek mythology in general is like really interesting, but there are now so many like books and just like retellings of like those stories, but from the female, like a female perspective, or the female characters that didn't get a voice. And, you know, anyone who's been listening to this podcast for a long time or just knows me, like that's the bit I'm interested in. So like I get it. I have consumed so much like Greek mythology lore in these last few weeks. It's been insane.
I just don't even know like what happened. Is this just like a generational thing where our generation is obsessed with lore?
Do you know
Because
what
if
I
you
think it
ask
is?
anyone in the street around our age and they have that thing that they
Yeah.
know everything about.
It's like, you know, when you said that you weren't really into like the shipping side and edit side of things, were you at one point?
So I only ever have one ship that I cared
Mhm.
about, and we will get into it because you know exactly who that is.
The reason I ask is because I think at one point I was like into that, but I think I was like a lot younger. And
Mm,
whilst by now, like fandom doesn't have an age at all, but like fans do grow up. So
yes.
like the way that you consume media does not always, but it can mature. And I think for that reason, like you said, shipping and edits, I'm not saying that they're like immature at all, but I feel like you said, like the lore of things and being able to deep dive even
Yes.
further and look at stuff like that is more something you do as you get older, I guess.
I completely agree. I mean, an example I would give is and this is medium we've not spoken about yet, The Secret History, which is a novel. I mean, we've spoken a lot so far about like, you know, film and like TV, that kind of thing. But with The Secret History, it has a massive fan base and it obviously had a revival with dark academia. Um we could even talk about aesthetics when it comes to fandom, but that is a whole thing. Don't even want to go near that. But basically, The Secret History is a book about, for those who don't know, it's a book that kind of like dissects academia and like criticizes it. But what happened is a lot of young people are like, OMG, Dark Academia, slay. And they started shipping characters and like drawing the characters and making edits. And it was brilliant because you see people's imagination when it's just a novel. You know, you're not provided any images or anything. But at the end of the day, these characters are meant to be really bad people, and they have like their interpersonal relationships are really messed up, and they're like, OMG ship. And it just
Mhm.
shows how like warped people's brains have become by like a lot of like fandom language, I guess.
Yeah.
And people do it as well with K-pop idols. They
Mhm.
bloody ship them. And I'm like, what's going on? And it's I hate to
Yeah.
generalize, but you're right, it is quite often the younger
Yeah.
audiences, you know?
We briefly got into this in our fan fiction episode that we did
Yeah.
last year because, as Liana said, I'm sure we'll get into it a bit more in a minute. But we both spoke about like what the fic was for us. Like everybody has that one fan fiction that even to this day they still read. Liana had one that was set in fiction. I had one that wasn't.
Mm,
And for that reason, I didn't reveal what it was, not because I'm embarrassed or anything like that, but because, you know, as you said, I've gotten older, I don't really agree with like
mm.
like shipping or having fan fiction of like real people anymore. Not that I'm saying I ever agreed with it. I was
Mhm.
young, I didn't get it. Go back to that episode if you want to hear my excuses. But I think, like I said, you're right. I was actually watching I think it was today or yesterday, just a video essay of somebody talking about that and how, yeah, fandom and shipping in particular really does warp the way people think about things, because you can even apply it to the queer baiting debate that's been
Yeah.
going on for a while now. The fact that it's like, you know, people are calling out like real people for queer baiting. And it's like, I don't completely disagree that people like real life people can queer bait. Like, of course they can. But the people that are being called out for just not revealing their sexualities, or like that whole idea of like nobody owes you anything,
Mhm.
is very different to people who know what they're doing. Like
Yeah.
we've spoken about before how, you know, we were both, and some of us, mainly me, still are part of the emo culture when
Mhm.
we were growing up. And that was a big one that had, you know, real debate around it, because like you had a lot of musicians and artists in the emo scene, you know, I would just pick up My Chemical Romance as being one, that were actually real advocates and allies for the queer community. And then you had other ones that just used the idea that, you know, people shipped certain bandmates together
Mhm.
to bring in fans because they knew that's what they wanted to see. And I was like, and
Yeah.
that was the difference, you know?
It happens in K-pop right now. I know someone who's gone into K-pop in the last couple of years, and they're like, "Oh my god, all the love the guys show to each other, like all the rumors." I'm like, they're doing that intentionally. Like,
Mhm.
I don't understand how you can't tell, but I guess when you've kind of been involved in fandom for a long time, you do develop more of like a keen eye for it, and you're like,
Mhm.
you get a bit jaded, a bit cynical.
I also think, and this may be I don't think I don't think it's controversial. People might think it is. I think there's also a difference when you are a queer person in a fandom and you're a straight person in a fandom.
I
And I
agree.
do think most of the time it is straight people that can't really see the difference. And I get it because, if you're not involved in that kind of community anyway, I mean, in this day and age, it's genuinely shocking because, like I said, there's just allyship everywhere.
Hmm.
Actually, that sounds really overstated. There's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I feel like that can play a big part in it as well.
Oh, completely. Because I feel like straight audiences, they just like and it's not through any fault of their own. It's just you're less likely to see it through a queer lens, if you're even able to at all. Really, let's be real. Um, so of course, like viewing these things, you're not quite going to notice nuances and all that that would lend authenticity. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I just think that like it's who's in the wrong really? Like, is it the management companies? Is it the fans? Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mhm.
Where I think the blame definitely starts to shift to fans a little bit more is the creation of like the fanfic, like you say, like about real people. We've clearly been talking about like the original content fanfic side of this four pillars concept. And I think talking about like Wattpad and AO3 specifically is probably needed
Mhm.
because, it's one thing to have just like written a little thing for you and your friends. It's another to like write stuff about living people and post it on these platforms, which are made specifically for like, let's be real, smutty stories. Like,
Mhm.
people like to act like that's not what they're for, but let's be real, what do you go to those websites for? I think we all know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm just as bad as anyone else. I don't read real people, that's my line, but I got into fanfic a bit later in life.
Mhm.
So that probably explains it. Whereas, if you're young, like as I imagine you might have been, like you
Mhm.
don't question it. You're just like, oh my God, yes, because they're not real people to you.
I think as well, like, I get it's difficult to say because, we are in, like, our mid-20s now. Um, so young people in fandom today, I'm not so sure, but at least obviously and this isn't me making excuses, it's just the way that it was, but when we like 10 plus years ago, when we were, like, reading these kind of stories or, like, consuming this kind of media, like, there wasn't that big of a connection. Like you couldn't there wasn't the opportunity to probably ever talk to like
Yeah.
your favorite artists or whatever online. Whereas, like today, like artists like tag their fans, they actively encourage this communication.
Hmm.
We didn't have that. And for that
Yeah.
reason, there was like a really big disconnect where I don't really think a lot of people did think of them as real people.
Hmm.
Whereas today, with things like Twitter and like Instagram, like where you can, like I said, you can literally directly talk to these famous people,
Hmm.
it does feel weirder.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you're still doing it, I mean, you got some balls, but
Yeah.
like, I don't know how you could talk or like see like kind of like the real life of this person and then be able to go away and write this like really, really intense and just private
I agree.
situation.
I also think like now that so many celebrities and public figures are on social media, it's so much weirder to be writing weird stuff about them. Like it was always weird, but like they can see it. And I mean, I was just as
Yeah.
bad as other people. I was 14 writing really vile shit about celebrities online, like filthy stuff. And I was a virgin writing those things. But like, can you imagine being a grown ass adult writing
Mhm.
those things? I mean, there is an aspect of fandom where like you do think to yourself, like, is does it benefit from people being young or not thinking critically? Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like I feel like there's just something about things that draw in young people that can be very creepy and bizarre. And
Mhm.
one of the main ones is unfortunately K-pop. I mean, look at the way they become so obsessed. And like before anyone in any comments or anything like starts to attack me, I have been into K-pop since I was 16, like I'm like a decade in and I'm just as into it as ever. Like I don't like, keep up with music videos. I was never a merch buyer. And I think because I've been into it since before it had its massive blow up, seeing people now get into it you know, in this age where there's like recessions at every fucking country, cost of living crisis and everything, and people were like crazy spending money on it, like it's blowing my mind, because like even when I had a crazy amount of expendable income when I was 17, I thought it was a waste of money. I'm not saying I'm any better than anyone, like I know it sounds like that, but that's not what I mean. I just mean it's crazy that like fandom has brainwashed people into thinking they need it, because as much as people go, oh, it's the marketing, it's not just that. It's on TikTok, people showing their hauls and their bookcases of K-pop albums, and it's so bizarre, and like
I mean,
people competing over cars. I don't know. Sorry.
Don't get me wrong, like I did buy a Kingdom Hearts Keyblade keychain the other day. But that was like a minuscule costing compared to what like you're saying. So like I get it. I mean, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, look behind me. Like this whole room is, I say full, it's not full, but you can see what I mean. Like I have stuff. Some of it's from when I was younger, so I've had it for a while. But like, yeah, I mean, if you have like a shitload of disposable income and you want to spend it on this stuff, definitely fucking do it. Like I get it. I love seeing people's, like, you know, when they do like their Star Wars rooms and stuff like that. Like, I think they're really fucking cool. It's not for me, but I think they're really cool. But then, yeah, when you see people who, like, literally, if you've been panned out, that's all they have. It's like, oh dear.
Yeah, because I always just kind of think like, I'm always like, wow, that looks so cool, that looks so cool. And then you zoom out for a second and you think like, fuck, do they spend all their money to collect these things because they want to prove it to other people? Like if it's for self-gratification, fucking go for it. But if it's to show off on the internet, that's a different thing. And I think a really weird little niche area of the internet is film collectors. So like Criterion collectors and all. You don't really think of them when you think fandom, but they definitely are. People that collect movie films and Criterion films and Arrow Video and like old VHSs. I'm like, you, and then they always shit on people that collect like Funko Pop vinyls. I'm like, but you're doing the same thing.
Do you know there's a really interesting thing that you just made me think of? It's that whole idea, and this is when like the toxicity of fandom really comes into it. It's that whole idea that like you need to prove that you are not even the biggest fan, but like I'm a fan. It's like, you know, when that really annoying cliche thing when you're wearing a band t-shirt and someone's like, oh, I bet you can't even name 3 songs from the band, and it's like, you shouldn't fucking have to. Like, you are a fan of something if you like it. You don't have to consume all the lore, you don't have to learn the language, you don't have to know all the lyrics. Like, we just do that because we like to. We have those sponge-like personalities, because that's the other thing. If you're not the kind of person that does that, it's fine. You can still be part of the fandom. I'm giving you the rights now. I speak for every fandom. You are welcome. The only time you're not welcome is when you're shitting on other people. Like,
completely. I love how this has organically gone into the third thing, which is merch. One thing I kind of wanted to talk about was there is a film that turns 30 this year, and that's A Nightmare Before Christmas. And we both bloody love that film, right? And it led me to think about how, like, The Nightmare Before Christmas birthed a certain kind of person. I think you'd call it, like, the mall goth. You could literally say that Nightmare Before Christmas is, like, a rite of passage for them.
I'm not gonna lie, Leanna, I'm really starting to feel really called out by this, but carry on.
Yeah, but this is why I've picked this film in particular. People forget that the rise of the way we see merch is a fairly new thing. You know, so like when we think merch, we think of all the random stuff you can get surrounding something. Decades ago, it was, oh, I've got an official Star Wars figure, you know, like an action figure. Now you go in the kind of shops I'm talking about that would have risen up in like the 90s and noughties, like Hot Topic, Forbidden Planet, all those kind of like Blue Banana, and it's like not even things relevant or like that have, you know, trademarked or anything. It's just like random keyring knockoffs and all these different things. And I honestly, like, my head has this massive association between what you see now in Forbidden Planet and the rise of like Nightmare Before Christmas hoodies in like the late 90s, early noughts.
You are so fucking right, and I hate you for it.
Because I mean, you know, I had one of those hoodies, so
The Night Before Christmas is a big one for me. Like, that's the one for me that like I said, I love the film. I have loved the film. I've got freaking Night Before Christmas shit behind me right now. I'm not ashamed of that, and I'm not ashamed to be a part of that fandom. But it is one of the ones where I feel like a poser a lot if I ever have something Nightmare Before Christmas on me, because you are right. I mean, Jack Skellington's face was just everywhere at one point, like everywhere.
And it's also fascinating to me to like talk about how fandom bleeds into other things and fandom's relation with subculture. You see a Jack Skellington hoodie and you look at the person and you go, they like My Chemical Romance, Blink-182. Like, that's always fascinated me. It's like, it's not a rule, you know, it's not a science, but you can very often look at the merch someone wears and know, or at least I would have said that 10 years ago. It's
Mhm,
changed a lot now because of, you know, death of the monoculture and
mhm.
streaming, and, you know, people have much more specific tastes. But honest to
It
God, if you
has
asked me
and
in
it hasn't,
2000,
I would say.
you reckon?
I think it's only because I feel like the rise of emo has returned, and
Oh, yeah.
obviously certain bands like My Chemical Romance and Paramore and shit coming back, and another band dying a death, have really, risen up both people of different ages. But like, yeah, there's a lot of like, so when we went to go, just flexing now, when we went to go see My Chemical Romance
Yeah.
um last year, like the age range of the audience there was insane.
Yeah.
And you know what was even more insane? And I don't know if this is gonna if this is gonna lead us into another section of this. But I still can't get over the fact that Dan Howell was there.
At
Did you
our
know?
one,
Yeah, did I not tell you that?
stop it. Oh my God, like 13-year-old me would have lost it if I saw him.
I was gonna say, is that not the plot of a fan fiction?
Oh my God, I met Dan Howell at my MCR gig.
Literally that I'm surprised I didn't tell you. Literally after we came back from the concert, I was like looking through Instagram and he had posted that he was there. I don't know where he
No
was, but he
way.
had posted that he was there. And
And
it's
it
kind of
makes
like what
so
you
much sense, doesn't it?
this is what I'm saying though. I was like,
How was he not mobbed though? Because you would just think like the Venn diagram of Dan Howell
I
fans and
yeah,
MCR
well,
fans is
I
a
thought that as
circle.
well. And you know what was even funnier? There was at one point a really, really tall guy was stood in front of me and another friend that we were
Mhm.
with. And I kind of felt bad after he left, but I made like a bit of a sarky comment about being so short, and then other like tall people always standing in front of me, and then they kind of slinked off. It wasn't him, but I
But
said to my friend, I
imagine.
was like, how funny would it have been? But yeah, I just think like you just said about the fact that you can like see people in certain merch and then you associate them
Mhm.
with other fandoms. I just thought that was like a real worlds collide moment.
Yeah, that's
And like you said,
mad.
it makes so much sense.
And I mean, if we're gonna, I mean, Dan Howell, that name, it just sends shivers down the spine, doesn't it?
This is why I said I wasn't sure if it was going to send us down
I
like
mean,
a path.
it's not Dan Howell that gets you, it's Dan is not on fire.
Hmm.
That is
It
what
gets
gets
him as
you.
well. So
Yeah. I mean, that's so fascinating, when we talk about fandom. I mean, a fandom around like a living person. Like if we God, I didn't even think to include this, but yeah, YouTuber fandoms.
hmm.
Weird.
YouTuber fandoms are so, and like don't get me wrong, I was there, but like you said, with like TV shows,
Yeah.
you have the TV show. With films, you have the film. With actors, you have the stuff that they're in. With artists, you have their music. With
Yeah.
YouTubers, the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, why was there such intense fandom? I mean, we
Well,
know why there was such an intense fandom around Dan Howe, but you know what I mean?
he was genuinely at the time what a lot of girls loved, you know? He was
Mhm.
a quirky, many would say like manic pixie dream boy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he kind of, and I hate to say it, in a lot of those subcultures, a lot of women, young girls tend to quite like guys that are queer or queer coded. This is why there's a lot of queer coding in K-pop guys, because it makes them feel safe. There are
Mhm.
many reasons for this that I don't even feel equipped to fully discuss. You know, you could argue, you know, an absence of toxic masculinity, that's not possible, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that was part of the appeal of Dan Howell. So you got all these girls saying like, he's not like other guys, he's soft, he's a soft boy, blah, 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 blah. Also, the rise of soft boys was a whole thing, wasn't it? But ew.
Yeah.
Um, and then there
You
was
say
all
ew,
this.
we all dated them, Leah.
Oh, don't. And then there was, don't my phone back. And then, of course, there was the speculation about his relationship, which
Mm,
I feel comfortable talking about now. I wouldn't have a few years ago, but obviously it was a
mhm.
big grand reveal a few years back,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
honestly I felt like the internet imploded, and so did my brain.
Yeah.
That
Do
was
you know what though?
insane.
It was insane, but it really was one of those moments of like, however you feel about like, I guess just Dan Howe as a personality now, or just that whole side of like that kind of fandom. That was a really pinnacle and genuinely beautiful moment
Oh,
for that to
100%.
happen. And I did really appreciate how like he didn't have to,
Mhm.
but how he did make it kind of this big thing because I personally, I didn't feel like it was done for the sake of like clout or anything like
No.
that. Like, I'm not saying that everybody does, and I'm also not saying that everybody who comes out and does it that way is lying or anything like that. But obviously, a lot of people do know it's going to get people
Yeah.
going again. Whereas I generally don't feel like that was his intention.
No, not at all. And if anything, the video was brilliant. It was so
Hmm.
sensitive. It was so thoughtful. It was like long. He fully dove
Hmm.
into so many things, and he was so like vulnerable in it.
Hmm.
And it was one of the rare moments where I felt like, oh, the internet can be nice sometimes because I didn't see
Hmm.
anyone being cruel about it. Maybe
Yeah.
that's just my little corner of the internet, but yeah,
Do you
honestly,
know
I didn't.
what I think it was as well? I
Mhm.
feel like it's because he was also somebody who, again, like we're all part of the same fandoms, like growing
Mm,
up, and like we're around similar ages. So like the shit that he was talking about, like, did really resonate because it's like,
yeah.
yeah, that is like the kind of things that we grew up with in school, and like, why we came out a lot later in life, or
Hmm.
like why we
Yeah.
still have some like internalized, I don't want to call it shame, but like I've spoken on this podcast before about like not being hugely comfortable using the term lesbian, and like it's got
Hmm.
nothing to do with internalized homophobia for anyone comes for me,
Hmm.
because I've seen people saying that. It's just because unfortunately when I have used that word in the past, it's gotten a really uncomfortable specific reaction
Hmm.
from men. So I always felt just more comfortable calling myself gay or queer,
Hmm.
and to see somebody else again of like similar age range and like I guess I don't know if I'd say similar upbringing, but like similar experiences,
Yeah.
kind of put that out into the world. Just yeah, it felt very seen, which
Yeah.
was something I didn't expect to feel in my later 20s.
And that's something that I think showed that fandom can be a very beneficial thing. It's not all terrible like we've been talking about. It can be brilliant. I mean, there are people I met through K-pop Twitter 10 years ago that I'm still friends with to this day and keep in touch with. You can make these incredible bonds. It can help you through issues like we're talking about. And sometimes what I find fascinating is a lot of people that are involved in a fandom can be very similar in ways I don't realize. So like a lot of the people I met through K-pop Twitter were super emo, which is really funny to me. A
Mm.
lot of people that were into danisnotonfire turned out to be queer.
Mm.
It's fascinating how you can bond through this one thing so deeply and not realize there are actually a lot of other things
Mhm.
that bring people together. And I just think that that leads us maybe into like the final part, which is social media. I mean, we've been dancing around it, but I would like to dive into how fandom is evolving now, like late stage fandom, contemporary fandom, and how the newer platforms are shaping it, namely
Mhm.
TikTok, honestly.
Mhm. So I was just thinking I don't know how we've gotten to this, how far into this episode without bringing up Tumblr, but now that you've mentioned TikTok, I think it really fits into the fact that like how fandom moved over from Tumblr to TikTok
Mhm.
to be fandom, like, what it is today. And I know for a fact there is one particular part of TikTok, one particular edit that everybody's thinking about right now. I know Leanne is thinking about, and that is a Mr. Pedro Pascal
Living
just taking
legend.
over. It's crazy how, like, I don't, it's just insane to me because, like, I did, because it's finished now, watch The Last of Us. Like, I love it. I love the game. So I am part of the fandom. But the fact that that man has consumed my TikTok, like the thirst trap side of
It's
TikTok,
insane, isn't
I
it?
shouldn't be on that side. And yet there I am. And I watch them all because they are just weirdly enticing.
It's mad, isn't it? Because people they're not just obsessed with The Last of Us, they're obsessed with Pedro Pascal specifically. Like I've
Hmm.
always found like fandom around like single celebrities really interesting. And then
Hmm.
that goes far back because obviously that just lends into like it girls and shit, which have been a thing since like I don't know, forever. the 1920s, you had like all the It Flapper girls and shit, didn't you? Like Anya Taylor-Joy, all that crap. Pedro Pascal is the guy of the month. You know, there's always like a guy of the month. And
do you know what somebody said actually at work? I felt a bit bad saying it because I didn't mean it in like a harsh way. But somebody at work said the other day, they were like, why is everybody going mad over him? And I was like, because he's the flavor of the month. Like, don't get me wrong, I get it. Because like the other thing is that he, from what he has portrayed to the world, is a really sweet human being. So like I do get it, but people can't lie and be like, this would have happened anyway. Like, obviously it wouldn't have happened anyway. It's because of the way that the show's blown up and the fact that, like, you know, he is really good in the show and that it's gone on and people have found other stuff. And I also feel like it's because of the fact that the way he is in the show is so different to who he is as a person, and then just the other stuff that he's been in, that like it is kind of mind-blowing.
It just makes him appear like multifaceted and fascinating to viewers and all of that jazz. And he also just has one of those distinctive faces that works really well for drawing. That's been a whole thing on TikTok, hasn't it? That he's easy to draw.
That has killed me.
It's just built a whole cult around him, and I love it. I think it's a bit much. Like, you know, the interviewers asking him to say certain things, and it's just like, have some class. Have some class. But I think that, like, sometimes it's nice to see someone get celebrated just because they're loved, not because, oh, let's all pile on this celebrity we hate. So like, as weird as it has gotten, I don't like that side. It is nice to see him be celebrated. But what I find really funny is, like, you know, you spoke about Tumblr, is the way he would have been celebrated on Tumblr is so different to the way he celebrated on TikTok. So TikTok's like quick speed draw. You don't get that on Tumblr, you just get the drawing. Or you get a set of digital art, or you get loads of heavily edited GIFs.
I was going to say, it's the heavily edited GIFs. That's what you would have got more than anything.
Sentence imagines. And like, what I always found fascinating is that we come from a period where it was more about like creating, like, this is who I am, and like creating a Tumblr. And I remember I used to be so obsessed with like reblogging things in the right order so they looked right on my Tumblr. I kind of miss Tumblr, babes. And now it's just like consume, and it's so much faster. Like, while scrolling down a Tumblr feed and, you know, like Twitter feeds and it was like, you know, not a slow process. You do just it's nothing like TikTok. Like, fuck me, people are being trained to just consume at such a rapid rate. Like, I'm as bad as the rest of them. My boyfriend always laughs because I'll be 5 seconds into a TikTok or someone talking and I'm like, get on with it. And I will literally skip because I do not have the patience.
Honestly, the videos that don't have the little scroll at the bottom, I'm gone
handle.
because I don't know how long it's going to be and my attention span just isn't there. Like,
same. I thought it was just me.
It's like, I can't fully blame it on like social media shortening my attention span, because like I still, it's going to make me sound like really fucking pretentious, but like I still read books, like I still consume slower forms of media and I can do it. But there is just something about TikTok that's like, no, I will not sit and watch your 1 to 3 minute video. I don't care. I was supposed to say I don't care what it's on. There is some stuff, and I guess this is where the fandom side comes back into it again. There is some stuff I will sit and watch, but it is very rare.
I think it's because you go to TikTok for stimulation. Like, you go to TikTok knowing I want speedy content. Whereas, say you go to Tumblr, like, I'm going to have a little troll through, or, you know, I'm going to YouTube for a video essay. Do you know what I mean? They're very different in that way. And I've always thought that's fascinating, that YouTube is pushing things like shorts. No one goes to YouTube for shorts. If I want that shit, I'm going to TikTok.
Yes, we do post shorts. Go check them out. But yeah, I don't think I've ever...
You know, we're victims of the algorithm. Like, you've got to play the game.
But yeah, I don't think I've ever gone to YouTube and been like, I need a short. I don't know if it's just me, but like the devices that you consume the media on, like I don't really watch YouTube that often on my phone. Like, it will be a laptop thing because I know I'm going to sit for a while. And yeah, I'm not using, like, who uses TikTok desktop? Fucking nobody. Same thing with shorts. Like, that's why I'm not watching them.
Yeah.
But do go watch ours.
Well, I find fascinating as well. I've said fascinating a lot because this is just a fascinating topic. Is basically why do shorts on YouTube when the clips were the best part? At the end of the day, a lot of those, how do I explain it? A lot of those more controversial podcasts and stuff, they did the clips out of context, yeah? And that got them more monetization because people wanted the short things. And so that was like the only short form thing YouTube really could do. And then TikTok completely stole that and it ran away with it. And it
Do you
created
know
a
what's
completely
really
separate platform for it.
interesting as well is that, like, you know, when like you ask and you come across like a podcast clip, how many of them are actual podcasts? This is the other thing that like baffles me. It's like, I mean, again, okay, like you do what you need to do to get people's attention, but it's like, yeah, it's like, so do people just sit down and record random snippets? Like, how
I
do you do that?
actually think so, honest to God, because it does well on TikTok.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind. I find it hilarious. But like I've also found it really interesting sometimes how like a lot of those clips you find are so like irrelevant to the actual episode. Like I would say like, you know, our clips from our episodes are, you know, still relevant to the topic and like we're trying to like, you know, find ones that will make people go, oh, that was interesting, so I'm gonna go watch the episode. Whereas
Yeah.
a lot of clips you find, and it's the same across a lot of fandom, it's just got nothing to do with the original content. It's so far removed, but I don't know. I don't know how we got to this point. But anyway, I wanted to talk about on TikTok true crime, because that kind of blends into podcast as well, because podcasts have fandoms, which blows my mind. Maybe we have a little one out there. But like the fact that true crime podcasts have fandoms, that, do you know what? I'm just gonna go out there and say it. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. Like it does. I mean, I'm sorry if that, you know, upsets any listeners, but I also think you got to examine what you're consuming day to day. You really do. And like that also has blown up a lot through TikTok, hasn't it? A lot of those podcasts got bigger because of TikTok clips of them like really over editing moments from their podcasts and like talking about crimes. And I really don't like it.
I mean, we've spoken about this before. Like, we literally did a two-part
Yeah.
2 years ago now,
Yeah,
I
there was,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, where we spoke about like true crime on Netflix and then like true crime and film and things like that. And I mean, if people wanted us to, we could explore true crime via podcasts and social media. I think it'd be difficult because, like we said, we do have our opinions on it. We're not out to make anybody feel bad. It's just, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, people becoming too desensitized, but then more importantly, people becoming resensitized to things. And I think specifically, like you said, it's the way people go about it, like on TikTok, you know, like people are interested in dark and macabre stuff. Like people just have been for years and they always will be, but there is a way to go about it. And like, we don't know the perfect way to go about it. You know, like we don't make this kind of content, so we couldn't say it's been a long time since we've actively consumed this kind of content. But yeah, the way that TikTok does it, where like you said, when it's edited for like the shock value and it's kind of like loses all meaning, and it's like the whole idea of like, oh, but it means the victims can tell their stories and everything, and it's like, but that's not the way it's been framed. If that was the intention, it has not come across that way.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, sometimes like even things like their names, the fact that one of the most popular ones is called My Favorite Murder, that
Ooh,
to
I didn't know
me
that.
is so vile. Do you know the amount of people I know IRL, they're like, you have to listen to this podcast, My Favorite Murder? I'm like, are you hearing what you're saying right now?
But you know what? I think I can't remember if I don't know why my voice just went kind of American then, but I can't remember if I mentioned this when we did like, I think maybe it was our American Horror Story minisode we did for Halloween last year, because, you know, we briefly talked about the Dharma series that came out and the fact that a friend of my fiance's had said that Jeffrey Dahmer was her favorite serial killer. And I was just like, girl, think about what you just said.
Uncomfortable, isn't it? And I mean, if we're to talk about like other fandom stuff such as merch, these podcasts are letting out merch to do with serial killers. And I mean, it was one thing when people were printing shirts on Redbubble of like Jeffrey Dahmer. It's another thing when it's like you are making so much money because you've built a fan base around these. Like you're not just some random on Redbubble. Like that's so fucked up already. This is another level of it. And I just don't get how people don't see it. I think they get so involved in their community that they can't see it from the outside at all, you know?
I mean, I also just want to make the distinction. I mean, I don't know if Liana feels this way, so I'm just speaking for myself, but like, I do want to make the distinction between, I do know there are some podcasts and like YouTube channels out there that do handle this kind of content tactfully.
Yeah.
I know that they do actively play parts with the family's like consent. They do it right. Like if there is a blueprint for doing it, that is the way to do it. And like, yeah, and when they do merch, they're doing merch for their podcast and their channel.
And
they're not doing merch for like the
search parties and stuff.
Exactly. So like this is just not, we're not saying you can never talk about true crime. I mean, not that anybody fucking listens to us anyway, but like that's not what we're saying. And I just know that some people might think
take
that
it out of context.
Exactly. That's not what we're saying. It's just you all know, even if you watch it, you know that there are different ways of doing this, and you know the ones that are doing it in the uncomfortable way. I can't say right or wrong because who's to decide right or wrong, but there is an uncomfortable way and a more tactful way of doing it.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you could say that about so many different fandoms, honestly. Like, we mentioned Secret History earlier. That's a case of, you know, you have some people talking about something tactfully and some people being really gross. I mean, there are people who are like fans of like Lolita culture. That's another one where there are two very different sides of that. There's lots of, you know, fandoms where people view it in very different ways, and sometimes you slightly tip into the other side and you're like, what's going on? Like,
I mean, even like, I mean, this could require an episode or a mini-sode on its own. So if you wanted us to talk more about it, say, but it's like the dangers of shipping, because like you just said, it's like, it's one thing to, and this is even beyond shipping like real people together. Like if you are shipping real people together, at least make sure that they are of age, like, and it's consensual, because that's the other thing. A lot of the time there are these really dark fan fictions that are like being created with like non-age appropriate characters, incest, and it's like,
yeah.
I don't really have any more words to say, but you know the point I'm trying to make.
There's some really difficult discussions though as well to be had when it's like hinted at or included in said media. So like in Neon Genesis Evangelion, a big part of that is you know, puberty and sexuality, and so there are scenes where the teenage characters are nude, and it's hard because it's like when people are talking about or posting it, it's like, but in what context? To be very critical of like the fandom sometimes. Like you really have to like be like, am I okay to like something? I know that sounds really weird. It's hard to explain, but that's the same with like another thing I would dive into would be bloody, what would you call it? Oh, they're so me culture. I don't know if like you know that.
No.
You know when people post like Patrick Bateman and be like, OMG, I'm so him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's so funny because part of you can be like, oh, it's funny, it's ironic, it's obviously being stupid and melodramatic. But then there's also like, I don't know, kind of like bordering on incel culture.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that
there's a
kind
lot
of
of
like,
that.
yeah,
Like there's a lot of that in like just the horror community in general though, isn't there, when people talk about how like, you know, when they talk about either their comfort films or like you said, they post something and it's like, this is like me today, and it's like you can, most of the time you can tell that like it's satire or it's just, you know, people being goofy. But then other times then like you'll like it and then you'll just because it's not something people do that often, but you'll just go check the profile and then you look at other stuff and you're like, oh, okay, no, that's not what you meant. I'm just gonna take my life back.
Oh my god, it happens all the time. Like it'll happen on TikTok. Like I will like watch a TikTok and it's like OMG me coded, and it's just like Patrick Bateman like running around, and it's just funny. And then you go on their account and it's like, and they're like constantly posting like Taxi Driver, Fight Club, and it's like, ooh, maybe not. Maybe not. And it's funny because I think like that's like a kind of like fandom area that a lot of people are aware of. I think one people are less aware of though is like the Good for Her. That's like a whole fandom now, and I really don't like it. Like I think that borders on weird because it's like, oh, I'm gonna excuse these horrible actions these characters do in pieces of media because like OMG slay. Girl boss.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I can't lie, I have not grown out of that myself yet. Like, don't get me wrong, I have my limit. Like, you know, we briefly again in like our book talk episode last year talked about like female rage and stuff like that. Like I'm obsessed with it, but I'm obsessed with it for both the good portrayals but also the bad portrayals, because like it is really interesting to see the line. It's also really interesting to see women writing female rage and then men writing female rage and then female rage written from different experiences and from different ages, and like things like that. But I do see what you mean.
Yeah, and I think like fandoms like distort it sometimes, where like you could like kind of be influenced by other people's readings and kind of forget your own original reading sometimes. So like
Mhm.
so like with Midsommar, I remember the first time I watched that, I was like absolutely horrified for Danny. And then people kept posting good for her, and I'm like, yeah, slay. And then I kind of like thought for 2 seconds, I was like, wait, no.
Mhm.
She was brainwashed and
Yeah.
indoctrinated into a cult, saw
Mhm.
horrific stuff. She's under the influence of drugs.
Mhm.
It's not good for her.
No, I know. I literally saw somebody talk about that not that long ago, and they got, I can't remember who it was, but they got so much hate for it. But I was like, but they're kind of making good points. And
Yeah,
it's
and
like
it's
everything that he did was shitty.
but did he
Ah,
deserve to die? It's fine.
exactly. It's
Exactly.
like, ooh.
And that's the thing
Yeah.
though. Is it that people like genuinely agree, like good for her, or is it just, oh, this is a fun little fandom thing?
That's what I mean, though. This is the
Yeah.
thing where it's like you can, because you know, this is again something we have spoken about before. Of like, it's a fiction,
Mm.
right? But that's only not dangerous if you're somebody, I hate to say it, with your own mind. So like
Some
you
critical
know,
thinking skills, I
yeah,
guess. Yeah.
exactly. So like you can do that and you can feel that way about it, but you know subjectively if this was real, it's fucked.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's most of the time people in those kind of fandoms or sides of those fandoms are not. And that's
Yeah.
when it gets really aggressive. And then when you have people who call it out and are like, actually, you know, it wasn't that deep, people just get really angry
Oh
and
my
they get,
God.
and that's when the possessiveness comes back again and they're
Mm.
like, yeah.
A big, big, big one I'd like to mention on this point is bloody Attack on Titan. The way people are divided into their viewpoint on said media.
Hmm.
Madness, especially with season 4. Oh my
Yeah, do you know, oh my god, I saw today a TikTok of all of the crimes that Erin has committed,
it's
and it's like,
insane, isn't it?
yeah, and it's like you can love him, you can fucking one of his babies, I don't care, but again, taking yourself out of the fandom, we all know what he did was wrong.
Hmm.
No matter why he did it, it's wrong. Innocent people have
Yeah,
died.
and there are people like defend it, and it's like, no, 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 I'm not talking about his reasons or anything. Just if you
Mhm.
look just at the core fact of what he does, it's fucked up,
Yeah,
you know?
subjectively, it is wrong. But like I said, you can still simp over him if that's what you want. But just promise me that you can step back from it, you know, when you need to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's just like people like diving so far into fandom and characters. I'm like, whoa, chill, babe. Like, they're still like
Mhm.
real life, you know? Another one is Game of Thrones. Like, so the way some people defend some of the, oh, House of the Dragon specifically. Oh my God, the way people get so invested in the fandom and like so obsessed with certain characters, like that they just like completely like don't even register that some of these
Mhm.
things are really fucked up. Blows
Mhm.
my mind. Damon specifically.
Yeah, another one, just because it's recently come around again, Joe in
Oh my God,
You.
yeah.
That's been actually something that I really think we should talk about at some point because from the beginning of that show to now, the way people have changed has been insane.
I know.
But yeah, that's another one. It's kind of crazy.
It's funny when you start laying them all out, isn't it? How like
Mhm.
you don't really realize how much like fandom really does warp people's perception of things.
Mhm.
More than I probably realized going into this conversation, honestly.
Yeah.
But you know, we're not saying that like people don't have a mind of their own, but of course there is
Mhm.
groupthink, you know,
Yes.
and this you know, it
Mhm.
lends to it a lot. But I I think like we've covered like all the main things to do with fandom and we've gone every which fucking way with it. I'd like to end on maybe some light notes, you know, because we've gone to some weird places.
Yeah.
I think probably the best thing I've ever gotten from fandom other than my online friends is my yearly reread. And it is a lovely little ditty. It is a Game of Thrones AU. I am kind of being a hypocrite here because it is Gendry and Arya. I know we're talking about things like age gaps and all, but I kind of tend to turn a blind eye and pretend the characters are closer in age,
Mhm.
which is a bit ignorant of me, but whatever. And I love that shit. It is so long, it's novel length, and
Mhm.
Sky can vouch for me. I read that shit every single year.
Honestly, your yearly snaps of just like you saying you're gonna dive into it, I wait for it. Like
I'm only reading it, it's happening tonight.
I but I said to you, like I had a similar one, which like I said will remain unnamed just for the fact that does concern real people. But yeah, I think for me, like, especially with that specific fic, it actually got me back into writing again
Mm.
because it was just so well written. It was so fucking long. Like, it was longer than the one that you read, but it was just so well written and it made me want to write again. And now, hopefully, at some point, I'm just holding myself accountable here, I may have a novella published in the future.
Hell yeah.
But in the meantime, yeah, there's just so much. Yeah, I think for me, it's the creativity that comes with fandom.
Yeah.
Like, I think being a creative person anyway definitely helps. Like, I'm not saying that you're suddenly gonna want to become a writer or an artist because you're in a fandom, but being in them, because you also have, like you said, that community of people like pushing you on. And like, other than yourself, I hate to say it, but I have probably had more encouragement from people in online communities than I have in my real
Oh,
life.
yeah.
You
Fact.
know, like, I remember at one point, I think it was in uni when I was like in our writers Discord, and it was just so nice. I didn't know any of these people, but they were all like so helpful. And I even had like a virtual birthday party. It was a whole thing, but it was so cute, and I love it.
That's the thing, isn't it? As much as we've talked about some of like the darker sides of fandom, I mean, like we barely even scratched the surface, honestly. There's
Hmm.
just so much good from it, you know, like
Hmm.
you mentioned the creativity. I mean, writing, music, artwork, illustration. Like you just find people that do all these incredible, incredible things. And, you know, like fandom is what got them started. Like maybe they just really loved a certain piece of media, so they started drawing things from it. And now they're working at Pixar or some shit. Like
Hmm.
people get found through those things. I think it's brilliant.
Hmm. I completely
I'm
agree.
curious to see like how fandom develops further. I mean, like TikTok has like you know, it's not completely changed it beyond recognition, but it has
Hmm.
definitely like altered it for a new generation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's just shifted it, and like in like 10 years time it will be something else.
It'll be a different
um
beast, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would really like to know, wherever you're listening to this, leave a comment or find us on our socials, what your experience with fandom was slash
Mm.
is, because I know we have listeners of like slightly different age ranges, so it would be really interesting to get some perspective on like modern day fandoms, because the
Yeah.
thing is with us, like, there are some modern fandoms we're in, but most of the fandoms that we're in, like Liana has pointed out, are like decades old at this point, because
Yeah, I mean,
we
we're
are.
from the super Hulock era, you know?
Oh god, we didn't even get into that. Anyway, yeah, but it would be really interesting to have like to hear these experiences, because we said we realized the shared experiences we had with people that we've never even met or even spoken to, but like you can see them walking down the street and think, if we ever were to bump into each other, we'd probably have a lot to talk about.
And it's brilliant. Oh, I love that.
Hmm.
But yeah, like Sky said, leave comments. We actually love it when people interact with us. So leave them wherever you feel like. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like because it really helps. And on any other platform, any shares or interaction is great. So that is everything for today. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.